Now let's look at defining variables. So the original way of creating a variable in JavaScript was using the var keyword. And today there are another two main ways of creating variables, but let's just start with var. So if we list, for instance, var a equals 10, then the value 10 will be stored in the variable a as we expect. And so if we console log out the variable a, we expect to see a 10. And that's what we get. And of course, we can do operations on this as expected. So if b equals 20, then if we log out a plus b, then we get the expected 30. Right, so that's defining variables. And one of the issues that arose with variables was that the scope of the variable is rather broad. So variables, in contrast to other languages, once you define a variable, if you define a function after that, you can still access that variable. And in fact, that leads to a great deal of flexibility in JavaScript, but it can also lead to a number of bugs and issues if you're not conscious and aware that this happens. So another way of creating variables was defined, namely the let. And so let's say let x equal 40, and of course that works just like a variable. So if we console log x, then we get the 40 here. And let's write a little if block. So we'll cover if-then statements later, but for now, just accept that we are going to run a check. So if true, and of course true equals true, so it is going to, so this condition is true, then run this block. So the point is to create a sub block of code here. So we are just wanting to try to change the value of x here. So we can say let x equal 50, and we can console log x here. And then let's try outside of this block of code, right? So there's a block of code here. We'll talk about the if statement later, but for now, let's just accept that in addition to defining code, just one statement after another like this, we can also create sub blocks of code which run under specific conditions. And this condition is always met, right? Another way to say this is if true equals true, or if 1 equals 1. We know 1 does equal 1. So we know this block must run. So first we will get a value of x. We expect that to be 40. And then when this block runs, we expect we'll have a different value for x, and we'll see a value of 50 here. But now if we also log out the value of x outside of this block, our question is, would this value of 50 overwrite the value, the original value of 40? So let's see what happens here. Right, so you see it doesn't change. So originally we had 40, and so the log gave us a 40. Then running inside the sub block of code, we can see we set x to 50, and so we logged out that value of 50. But now after this block terminates, this let x no longer exists, and we revert to the original definition of x, and we can see that now has a value, the original value of 40 there. So the let way of creating a variable allows us to define sub-blocks and treat this in effect as a different variable to the one defined outside of that block. And of course, the best way to compare them is to do this again. So let's do this now using var instead of let. So if we have the var y equals, let's say 10, and then we console.log y, and then we run this nonsense check again. If 1 equals 1, then let's define var again. So var y equals 20. And then if we log out the value of y here, we expect to see a 20. And then the question is, what do we get outside of this block? And I just want to separate these two here. So I'm going to console log just a separator here. So let's run that. And so we can see in the first case, when using let, the operation inside the block didn't change our value there. Whereas with var, we had the value of 10, and then inside the block, we changed the value to 20. And when we exited the block, the value of 20 persisted. So in the case of var, any operations, even if it looks like a redefinition of the variable, that will influence the original variable, whereas with let, it won't. Okay, so that's the main difference between var and let. There is another type of variable, the const. And as the name implies, it's for constant values. So if we say const z equals 10, then we won't be able to change that variable after this original definition. So if we say z equals 20 here, we will basically get a complaint, invalid assignment to const z. So z was already defined. We shouldn't be trying to change it. And we may well want to use this type of variable where we know that the value must not change, and or it might be the case we don't want our end user to be able to change a value or something like that. So const has many applications that way. So those are the three main ways of defining variables, right? We've got var, let, and const.